Good evening. Welcome to the North Andover Finance Committee meeting on June 9th, 2020. I would like to call this meeting to order. It is now 7:03 p.m. Pursuant to Governor's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the North Andover Finance Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website at northandovermass.gov. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so on their televisions by tuning to Comcast Channel 99 or Verizon Channel 28 or online at northandovercam.org. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the Town of North Andover website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. I would like to take a roll call because we are virtual. Tim Shearhart.
Present.
Christine Allen.
Present.
Edward McMillan.
Present.
Thomas Ringler.
Here.
Jennifer Luz. She's here. I think she's having a volume issue, but she is here. We can see her on the screen, and she is active in our meeting. And Charles Trafton. I'm not sure Chuck may be joining us later. If so, I will make that announcement. At the moment, he is not on the line. Okay, thank you so much. If we could now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, so now we will switch to public comment. It's 7:05. I have received one lengthy statement for public comment from Thomas Dugan. It is stated that it's a joint public comment to the Finance Committee and School Committee. I assume that means that is being submitted to both committees. There are three major items. I am going to include the precise statement in the meeting documents for everyone's viewing. However, I will not be reading it due to the length. I can tell you that the first question is regarding the police department, and the first question is not directly relevant to any of our agenda items tonight and is somewhat policy related. So I'd recommend it be directed to the Board of Selectmen at their next meeting, where I believe they actually are discussing this matter. Melissa, can you confirm that? Town Manager Rodriguez?
Madam Chair, that is correct. We will be having this as an agenda item at our meeting on Monday.
Great. So I would, of course, that question will be in our record, but there will be specific information discussed at the next Board of Selectmen meeting. I would recommend that question also will be answered there. Number two speaks about the proposed MOU, which will also be further discussed during our meeting tonight. So I would like to just table that to when the agenda item discussing the MOU. And the third is regarding future revenue and the CARES Act funding, which we're going to also be discussing on the agenda following a discussion of revenue and the MOU. So all of these the specific statement will be included in the meeting documents, so everyone can read it and it is public. And we will touch upon these items as we move through our agenda tonight. Okay, next item. discussion with Town Manager Rodriguez and Finance Director Savage regarding the proposed MOU and any foreseeable revenue impacts to the FY21 budget. So at this time, I will turn the meeting over to Town Manager Rodriguez, who will discuss, I think, specifically the proposed MOU, and we will have a conversation about that to start and move from there.
Sure. So the first thing
Thank you for joining us.
No, I'm happy to be here. And the first thing I'd like to do, if the chair would allow me, is just to announce that we just learned a couple of hours ago that the town has reaffirmed its AAA bond rating. We're really excited about that. We went through our bond analysis just last week and just found this out. But I think that it really speaks to this year's budget. And so it talks a lot about our budget within the document. And one of the things that it says is that given that property tax makes up 76% of the town's general fund operating revenues, coupled with strong fund balances, we believe that North Andover is somewhat insulated from the immediate effects of the pandemic, and therefore do not expect it to affect the town's ability to maintain budgetary balance and pay debt service costs. Furthermore, management is proactive in maintaining stable operating performance and has taken steps to identify where it would make budget modifications to address recessionary procedures if needed. And so it actually directly talks about the fact that we have this MOU that we're working on within the document that certifies our AAA bond rating. And I think that says a lot about the fact that we are working on this right now. And it goes on to say that they rate North Andover higher than the Sovereign because they believe the town can maintain better credit characteristics than the United States in a stress scenario due to its predominantly locally derived revenue base. In our view, that pledged revenues supporting debt service in the bonds is at a limited risk of negative sovereign intervention. And so I was very proud to read that today because I think we've been really taking the right steps and doing the right things in creating this budget. But it's nice to see that certified and recognized by the experts. And I think that's something we should be very proud of. And so as you know, the Board of Selectmen, and I believe you all have seen the language, did go ahead and vote to approve the MOU at their last meeting, well, not today, but their last regularly scheduled meeting. And I believe that the school committee will be voting on it on Thursday. And I'm just going to run through kind of what the MOU says, and then Lynn can jump in and talk a little bit about the revenue analysis because I know she completed that today. And so the beginning of the MOU really talks about the fact that we understand that there's a pandemic and that due to that pandemic, there's a concern that we could see a decrease in revenue and an increase in COVID-19 related costs. And those are things that we could never have known about when the budget was created, and that still we don't understand the impact of. And so it then goes on to say that the school and the town are entering into this agreement to proactively institute a process for decision making in the event that the response to the COVID-19 virus has a negative fiscal impact and results in a decrease in revenue or an increase in costs. And so it's an agreement between the Board of Selectmen, the town manager, the school committee, and the school superintendent. And the agreement agrees that in order to insulate us from potential budget shortfalls, that we will delay implementation of new initiatives that do not generate a cost savings or are not mandated by law. So for instance, if we have something that we're doing that we know is going to save us money, i.e. in the school's new initiatives, they have a special education funding that they know will actually save them money in the long run. That's something that would move forward. But if it's something that is not going to see cost savings or not mandated by law, we're saying is that we would not move forward with those immediately. So for instance, I have the part-time home housing person in my budget. I would delay the implementation of that. We have these fire promotions that we've been working on for a few years and that Columbia Gas really brought to mind that we need to move forward with, but we wouldn't move forward with them until we knew those revenues were there. The parties would pledge to analyze the revenues through the first and second quarter and make budgetary decisions based on that revenue analysis. We would do a monthly revenue analysis, and it would be reviewed by the Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations. We would complete a quarterly revenue analysis around September, and we would have that reviewed by the Revenue Fixed Cost Committee by September 10th. The Revenue Fixed Cost Committee would submit that review and their findings to the Selectmen and the School Committee. We all recognize that we have to fix any budget shortfalls before DOR will authorize our tax rate. So this would all have to be done well before probably the November timeframe. And then we set out a mechanism for how we would address the budget shortfalls, reducing 10% from the finance reserve account, which is about $160,000, Second, reducing operating capital, which is around $500,000. Third, making any possible reductions from shared services, so that's IT and facilities maintenance. And then fourth, making any possible reductions in health insurance, which if we had delayed the implementation of new positions, we would have savings there. And then finally, we would address any additional deficit by allotting percentages to the town and school in concert with their percentage allocation of the budget. We would continue to pledge to look for cost savings in the budget and work collaboratively to bridge any gaps. From those revenues, we would independently choose how to account for the decrease. So we would figure out, nobody would tell the schools or the town how they would have to figure out how to meet the deficit. They would have their own autonomy to do so. And then, due to the expected additional costs driven by COVID-19, we, one, would agree to seek reimbursement from all eligible COVID-19 related expenses from the CARES Act, FEMA, and other reimbursements, funding, and grants. In the event that we have non-reimbursable COVID-19 related expenses, we would work to fund those expenses first through the finance reserve account and then through a transfer from the town stabilization account at May 2021 town meeting. And that's really the agreement. And I'm proud of the work that we've done collaborating on this. I think it's been a really good process. And I'm very hopeful that the school committee will agree to it on Thursday. If they do not, then unfortunately, Lynn and I and Greg and Jim will have a very busy weekend trying to figure out what our budget will look like on Tuesday.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is Chris Allen. Earlier in what we were talking about, you said there was, you referenced an example of initiatives that you would definitely put forward and ones that you might, might not. And one of them, you mentioned the firefighters and that was something you've been working on for several years, or at least 2 or 3 years.
They've been working on it.
Yeah. So you would still lump that in with as a new initiative, even though you've been working on it for a couple of years.
I would. I mean, for me, the definition of new initiative is a new thing you're doing in your budget that you weren't doing before, right? It's something that did not exist in last year's budget. That's how I look at a new initiative.
I mean, even though you've been working on it, it is new money that you will be funneling into something like, here it is, here we go. Yeah.
Right. That's how I look at it, and that's my commitment on the town side. I'm very concerned about local aid. We've had these conversations with the chair of Ways and Means and with our senators and our representatives. We know we're not going to have a state budget by July 1st. We know the significant deficits that exist on the state side, and we need to make sure that we insulate ourselves and that we protect the town from any shortfalls. I'm confident that we'll be okay. I'm confident that we'll be okay. But if we're not, I want to make sure that the cuts that we do have to make are not doubly as deep because we weren't prudent in the first quarter.
Yep. Now that makes total sense to me. I just wanted to clarify, and you expressed it excellently about, what your view is of a new initiative, because that is the language within the document. So thank you for that very much.
So that was really helpful. Thank you, Town Manager Rodriguez, for that synopsis of the MOU. Does anyone have any very, specific questions about the steps within the MOU for Melissa or Lynn? Before we move forward, I want to ask some questions about the CARES Act and some of the funding sources outside of what we would normally see in quote normal times. But is there any questions specifically about this language in the MOU?
Hi, yes, this is Jen Laws. I have a question about it. I appreciate that the new initiatives that we were just talking about are going to be delayed, but I'm not clear about when the timing is that it will be implemented. So is there a point at which the town feels we are okay and the school department can hire all of those new hires that they were presented? You can go ahead with the firefighter promotions. I'm just not clear on it from the language when that comes up and how you think that will work or what the timing is. So maybe if you could explain that a little bit, that would be helpful.
Sure. So
Thanks.
for me, it's after the Revenue Fixed Cost Committee makes their findings on September 10th, by September 10th. And so that, I think it's the end of the first quarter. Our bills are due September 1st. We'll have a good idea. Are people paying? Are licenses down? Are excise down? We'll be able to really kind of absorb what it looks like by then. And so, yeah, we're looking at that September 1st date.
Yeah.
Great.
I would,
Any,
Sasha, if I may, I have one thing reading through the MOU was I think first of all I think it's great. I think it's a perfect tool in a situation like that. It couldn't be better. I really appreciate the work you guys did. The one thing I was wondering reading through is, so we have significant, free cash and reserves. And, we're not in a crisis like that, would you use reserves, to, plug some holes? So I'm just wondering how the logistics works between, how much are you be able to dip into the reserves before, we saw maybe a revenue decrease by 5%, but dipping into the reserves, we could just keep our budget the way it is. So I'm just wondering how that gets reconciled. How much can we use out our reserves before any revenue decreases will actually cut into our budgets?
So right at the end of town meeting, and Lynn, correct me if I'm wrong, we'll have about $5 million in the stabilization fund. And so, the only reason, is that right, Lynn? 5 million?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct. Yep.
The only reason that we would use those reserves would be to pay for one-time revenue, one-time expenses. Because if we, I think I've been saying that fiscal year 21 looks worse, right? And so if we use the stabilization fund to fund our budgetary costs, our ongoing costs, right? Let's say we use stabilization fund to pay for the part-time housing person, right? In fiscal year 21, we would have a gap. We would have created a structural deficit, right? And then we'd be having to look for that money to pay for not just the fiscal year 20 cost for that, but the fiscal year 21 cost for it as well. But I do think the stabilization would be a very legitimate place to go to for one-time revenues related to COVID-19 that are not reimbursable. Because stabilization really is a rainy day account, right? It's your account you have that you've been saving money for when things go a little bad, right? And this would be an instance where it's raining, it's pouring, really, right? And so this is when you would go to that account to pay for those one-time costs.
And just maybe an example, I don't know how real that was. I just came an email across where Massachusetts is thinking about having only 12 kids in a classroom starting in fall. I don't know how real that is, and was that just fake news or whatever. But if that's the case, and I know they did this that way in Germany, where you kind of stagger kids, some come in the morning, some come in the afternoon, but it has enormous cost on the school system by just handling that logistics, double busing and all, and I mean, there's a lot better. So I was, that I think is a perfect use for these stabilization funds, because hopefully that's a one-off and we only deal with that once, and then it's in the past. Are you hearing the same, and is the school already thinking how they would deal with that situation already?
So I think the regulations that people are kind of in a panic about, and I'm in a panic about as well with my small kids, were for about summer school. And so I think that that's really caused people to reflect on what is it going to look like in the fall, right? And is it going to be like it is, like they're suggesting for summer? And so one thing I've been saying to parents that have been calling me panicked, and my own panics in the middle of the night when I think about this, is a lot has changed in the 2 months, 2.5, 3 months since COVID started, right? I mean, we're eating outside in restaurants tonight in North Andover, and that's a huge step, right? So I think a lot could also change before we get to September, but we have to be planning for what the worst case scenario is. And so I know that the superintendent and the school committee has been forming subcommittees and working groups, and that they're getting together and really talking about, the state's going to give us guidelines, but we have to implement them. We have to implement them in the best way that works for North Andover. And the only people that know that is the school department, right? I mean, I can't help them with that. The state can't really dictate what their everyday feelings and sentiment and the social emotional beings of our students will look like. So I think that we recognize that, and I think that you're right. I think the CARES Act will reimburse a lot of those expenses. Don't forget, we're eligible for up to $2.7 million. But I think that if there's costs that are related to COVID that the CARES Act and FEMA do not reimburse, then the Stabilization Act would be the place to go for those.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Thomas, for the question. Just mentioning for the record, that was Thomas Ringler. So I guess, could we segue a bit, Melissa, into a conversation about the CARES Act specifically? And so I know that you and Lynn and the town administration has been working actively to try to produce, specifics about how we anticipate the initial spending of these dollars. And then obviously we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So it'd be really helpful, I think, for us to understand the CARES Act, what it covers, which I know the Finance Committee has been reading up on, and then other FEMA and grant funding. I believe there was some grant funding that was awarded already, and how that kind of works, and then looking forward, how we anticipate that process to go.
Sure. So CARES Act, in order to be eligible for CARES Act funding, it has to be related to COVID-19, not budgeted, right? Not in your budget as of March 1st, 2020. And it has to be an expense that occurs between March 2020 and December 2020. And so the first application is due the 12th. We have just submitted it. The second application does not have a due date yet, and I would assume that's because we really don't know what our expenses are going to look like for fiscal year 21. And as we learn that, we'll be able to figure out what those expenses look like. So when the state of emergency started, Lynn right away created separate accounts, had everyone start tracking, and we all started doing that. So right now we have about $150,000 worth of expenses related to COVID-19. We submitted those today. We heard back that we had about $592,634, not about exactly, that the CARES Act would reimburse, and that the rest of that they felt would be reimbursed by FEMA. So we have about $850,000 in total reimbursable. About 500,000 or so, or almost 600,000 will be coming out of CARES Act funding, which means that we'll still have $2.1 million available for these unanticipated costs that Thomas and I were just discussing, and other costs. I mean, a lot of and I know I sent you all the chart of what right now is CARES Act reimbursable, and I expect that is going to be changing as school gets back, right? It's going to go from distance learning to talking about actual learning, but it talks a lot about cleaning, food insecurity, distance learning, materials, staff. It's really anything you could think of that's related to COVID-19. And so, we've been really lucky that our staff has done a very good job of tracking what the costs are. And I know Lynn it's been I would say a frustrating application for everyone, but Lynn did a great job of getting it in. And, we're excited that we're eligible for CCBR. Yes, it was due the 12th. She submitted the final today.
So that's just to be clear. So it was just submitted today. So that was just finalized today, which is why, just for the committee's edification, why we didn't have those documents in advance of the meeting. So would it be possible to give us some further information in writing so we could submit that to the public record and that we can review as well?
Sure, of course.
That would be awesome. But that's why, I can't imagine how time consuming that was.
Lynn's been working on it nonstop. She was tracking me down for a signature right before this meeting practically to get it up and in. So, I'm very thankful that she took all that time because every penny counts right now.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone and Lynn for all that work. So
I have a quick question, Sasha, of our town manager, if that's all right. This is Chris Allen. Just to reiterate then, the spending of the CARES Act money, it looks like it's more reactive rather than proactive. It sounds like, you only receive after you submit receipts for things that you have already spent on, like all that tracking you were doing, this is COVID related. Is that accurate?
That's 100% true. And so because of the state of emergency, we're deficit spending in these accounts that we've created, and then we submit for reimbursement.
Okay. So it's not like at this point you're just going to get a lump of money and then decide, how do we spend this? That's not accurate.
So we'll get a lump of money,
okay.
But if it's not, we'll basically get, and Lynn, correct me if I'm wrong, $2.7 million into an account. However, if we don't have COVID-related expenses that we submit to the government, they'll take it back at the end.
Correct.
I see.
That is correct.
So it's not, so to be clear, and I think Chris, you were kind of alluding to this. We're not going to have this process where we have a cash flow problem in our community, right? Where we have to spend all this money, but we don't have it. We are going to get those dollars. We can use those for eligible expenses and then submit the record of that. But we will have those dollars to utilize. We're not going to have a cash flow concern.
Also,
Just to
kind of
be
what I'm
clear.
also kind of getting at is that like it's not like it's an unlimited access to these funds either. So we can't decide like, ooh, this would be a great thing to spend the money on. Let's spend it over here. It's only very narrowly and specifically if it's COVID related. I just wanted to impress that point.
This is Lynn
Yes.
Savage talking. And you also have to remember that there are specific categories that each one of these expenses has to fall into. And I have to keep records of all of this because it's going to be audited, so that at the end of once this is all over, as the town manager, Melissa Rodriguez said, we have to give the money back if we don't spend it. Whatever else we get reimbursed from FEMA on is less than we would need to use for the CARES Act.
So could you just specify a little bit or talk to that? So how FEMA and the CARES Act interact, just for everyone to understand that?
FEMA is really disaster relief funding, right? Because we're in a state of emergency, we're eligible for disaster relief funding, but it's much more limited in nature than the CARES Act is. And so it's really related to like an exact response to the disaster, to the pandemic. It's usually more public safety or public health oriented. You wouldn't see reimbursements for schools or cleaning of buildings, right? It's really more emergency suited.
Okay. And so that comes first, and then the CARES Act would kick in after that.
Yeah.
And then we'd utilize the 2.7. Okay. Or
Right.
2.1.
And then the other thing about the CARES Act money is that we have been told that we can actually use the CARES Act money to pay the portion. So there's a match with FEMA. We can use it to pay the match, which is great news. And there's also legislation currently pending in Congress that could allow, and there's some indication that this has feet under it, but right now has not passed, that could allow us to use the CARES Act money to make up for lost revenues. So that's interesting as well. And I don't know what will come of that, but that's something that's being pretty actively discussed right now in Congress.
Interesting. Okay. Tim, I think you had a question.
I do, Madam Chair. Sorry, Town Manager. What's your understanding relative to when those expenses have to be incurred? The period is through December 31. That's incurred, liability, accrued. Can you define for me what the town's position is going to be on those? Because come December 31, first of all, I pray that the tough part is done. And secondly, if it's not, December 31 comes and maybe there'll be something else from the federal government. But if not, we're done. So what's your opinion on the accrued expenses?
Sure. So I would say it's costs incurred in contracts signed by December 31st, 2020, is how I would read it. I do anticipate that if the state of emergency is extended, we would see supplementation of that and changes to that. Obviously, I think we all are trying to think positively that by December 31st, we're back to normal and Santa comes and everybody's happy again. And that's my hope. But, I think that right now we're looking at, contracts that are signed, money that's encumbered by December 31st, 2020 per the law.
Okay.
So not actual dollars.
Right.
Thank you. Great question, Tim.
Sasha, this is Thomas Ringler. I have just for understanding, that CARE Act money, is that already, do we know we get it, or is it you have to wait in line and see how the allocation works out, across all the other towns applying for that money?
No, they allocated it in advance. So every town got notification of the amount of money that they're eligible for. It was all allocated in advance.
So there's no risk, just to be clear, there's no risk at this point, in your opinion, of us not receiving that funding.
Only if we don't have enough expenses, right? So,
but not any other any other factors
No.
outside of, needing to spend those dollars. Okay.
What was the allocation based on? Was it just head count or budget size, or how do they figure out what we get and what another town gets?
I think it was based on population, based on the numbers that I've looked at. So, it's kind of looked like it was a little bit all over the map. And I know, Lynn, we looked at what Andover got. Off the top of my head, I can't remember. I don't know if you remember, but it looked like it was based on population.
Yeah, I have it right here. 1 second. Andover got total eligible 3.2 million.
So definitely not based on budget, because their budget is much larger than ours. Which,
I think it's
Right.
based on population, if I recall reading it within some of the documents.
another reason to do your census.
Very true.
I have another question. This is Tim.
Tim?
Melissa, town manager, could you speak to the, did a little research today because I'm retired now. The employee elementary and secondary education emergency relief funds under care. I understand that the town has received a grant fiscally 21 of $308,000 towards the school.
That is
Can
true.
you speak to
So we did receive, and it's very confusing because we've got two different CARES Acts that's pending over here on the federal side. And don't forget that the state legislation for school funding was also called the CARES Act. So there's been a lot of interesting rhetoric around all this money, but they did also receive a $300,000 grant for education related to COVID-19. A lot of it was for social distance learning. But that's been already received by them. They applied for and received that, which is great. We also received a grant from the state for the Department of Health, and they received a $10,000 grant, which we've actually used to pay for the nurses and some other educational expenses. And we received a grant, $300,000 grant from the Columbia Gas money to do the small business initiative. As well. So we have been applying to a lot of different avenues. Tomorrow, we're submitting an application for food insecurity to help with the food pantry. So we've been trying to apply for as many different things as possible, because every penny right now helps us get towards the goal.
on the education grant? Is that you don't have to worry about spending it, or do they have to justify spending it towards COVID-related expenses, just like the town and the CARES from the federal government?
Lynn, I was not told that was reimbursable. Were you told that was reimbursable? I believe they just dropped that, right?
Yeah, I don't have all the details on it because Jim hasn't had time to sit down and talk with me about it, because we have to record it and make sure we're tracking it. So I can't answer that right at the moment, but we can get back to
you.
you.
An answer on that.
We can get back to you on that, Tim.
Yeah, you know what? It won't be hard to spend the $308,000.
No, not at all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions about the CARES Act as it relates to FEMA and grants, and how it will assist us with future expenses going forward? No. So I guess my last question, you touched on this a bit, but I don't know if you have anything else to say, or anyone has any questions. We touched on revenue impacts, but can we dive into that a little bit? So where, again, if we could just get an update, as June 9th, so where we feel like we stand in terms of revenues for FY20, and then anything you guys are hearing, given your conversations with other municipalities and, Ways and Means and other appropriate bodies on, what we think we may see looking forward, which obviously we don't know for sure, but that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, Sasha, this is Lynn. And to give you the update on the revenue collections through today, everybody's been working diligently to get everything posted. I've been on them every second, and they'll be glad when this is all over and I don't have to touch base with them every single second to find out if everything got posted. So revenue collections to date right now, for example, real estate taxes, we're at 98% collected. We still have 20 days left to collect. Motor vehicle excise is at 97%. And pretty much all the other different categories within the revenues, for example, penalties and interest is over budget, it's 106% collected. Ambulance collections, 111%. Other revenues, 129. The big one is interest income. We're up at 212% collected at this point, and we still have one more month of another $80,000 probably that will hit the books by June 30th. So having said that, being collected at, at 98% collected of all revenues for the year, I still have about $3.6 million that will hit the accounts between now and June 30th. Actually, about 1.5 because I got to back out the from the free cash to cover the transfers, the reserves. But true revenue collections, it's going to bring us above budget by 300,000. That's assuming I do not collect any more real estate or motor vehicle excise between now and June 30th. And I still have the motor vehicle excise commitment of 500,000 that's due the 15th. So we're already going to be $310,000 over budget, which that's a surplus that will hit and fall back to free cash. So it's unrealistic to say I won't collect the rest of the real estate and motor vehicle between now and June 30th. We're already at 98%. It's 2%, which is not that much. For property taxes, it's about $800,000. I have no issue. We still have tax title that has to hit the books, and the rest of the real estate taxes that were due on June 1st that they're still going through the mail and pulling in the bank deposits and things like that and getting them posted. On motor vehicle excise, I have $100,000 that still needs to be collected between now and June 30th. I have a commitment of $500,000 out there that's due the 15th. So as it stands right now, I have no concerns whatsoever of meeting FY20 budget on revenues and exceeding it and having a surplus at the end of the year. And on the expense side, we have implemented a spending freeze right now, and everything that gets purchased has to be approved through the town manager. Everybody is aware of that. The only necessary things to purchase are, of course, are utilities and repairs on equipment and things like that in order to keep the town running. So there is anticipated there'll be a turn back on expenditures as well, and we'll have a good year. FY20, there are no issues, no shortfalls in revenues or anything like that. We still have the final payment from state aid, which is anticipated. No reason to not think that that's coming in. I haven't heard any different. So having said that, moving into FY21, I still feel, based on how we are well insulated and we do not rely on a lot of large things like hotel taxes or the meals tax, we don't heavily rely on that stuff. We don't heavily rely on the state aid. I feel that we'll be more than fine. And Melissa can probably talk more about the state aid and what she's heard from her various meetings with the state. But having said that, I think with the MOU and the safeguards we're putting in place, I see no issues and would strongly recommend favorable action to vote the budget as is, and we'll monitor it as the MOU states. I will personally guarantee you that I will monitor it.
Thank you, Lynn, much appreciated. Does anyone have any questions about FY20, Thomas?
Yeah, so I'm wondering, and Lynn, I think you mentioned a few things which why we're not so impacted or immediately impacted. But I was just in general, what's the structural difference of our town compared to towns who got really hit hard, and they don't know how to, they're thinking about, and maybe not necessarily here in Massachusetts. I'm just reading in the Wall Street Journal. There are here and there some states, and they really have a hard time to make ends meet. And here we are with zero impact, actually, with a better revenue model, with better revenue than budgeted. So what's the difference?
So I would say that the major difference that we have is that 75% of our budget is made up of tax revenue. And of the residential and of the tax revenue, 2/3 of that is escrowed. And so our payments are more automatically coming in. Maybe some other communities are. Our commercial base is relatively small. So if you have businesses that are closing and due to that are having valuation decreases or rent roll decreases on that side, we're not being impacted by that. A lot of other communities, like take for instance Andover, has a much larger commercial base than we do, and has a lot more restaurants than we have. And so they've been relying on meals tax when we have not really been relying on that. And so with the restaurants being closed, that hasn't impacted us as much. We don't have hotels tax, where a lot of other municipalities have hotels tax, and with the hotels not being utilized, we are not seeing that impact negatively as well. So I think that a lot of those factors insulate us from really being affected to the degree that many other communities are affected. It's one of the few times where you're like, oh, the majority of our budget is made up of real estate taxes. That's a great thing. You don't always say that, right? Because that means a lot of the burden, right, is on us, right? It's on the residents, it's on the businesses. But in this limited instance, it's a positive for the community.
That's a good point. I mean, for the last 6 years, we're like, when are we increasing our commercial base?
Right.
Which we still want to do. I don't think that's something. The last question, what about the Stevens estate? I mean, they are probably hit the hardest. That's the only pocket I could see in town that got really hit hard. How does that look?
The poor Stevens estate. So don't forget that while they're not having revenue come in, they also are not having as many expenses, right? So they're not using the bartenders. They're not using their cleaning company as much. And so there's things that we've been able to cut there to kind of remediate some of the burden on them. But you're right, they're not going to be able to open in phase 2. We're going to try to get them open in some limited capacity in phase 3, but for inside weddings, it's likely going to be phase 4 based on the governor's guidance. But I will say that of all of the weddings and events they've had that have canceled so far, every one of them have rescheduled except one, right? So one, the groom was actually leaving for the military, so they could not reschedule, but everyone else has rescheduled. And so, yes, I think that that they have more dire circumstances, but we're committed to working with them and figuring it out as we move along.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So do we have any additional questions? I guess the last one for me is really just talking, just kind of circling back, knowing what we know about the potential reduction or not in revenues for FY21, the additional potential expenses. How are you, from kind of a logistical perspective, going to approach that? So I assume at this point, right, we have this wonderful MOU that is going to allow us to go through those steps. But then in terms of using CARES Act funding or other types of funding, I assume that kind of has to be, you have to play that by ear, right? You don't know what those additional expenses are going to look like. We don't know what those additional requirements are going to look like. How do you anticipate, working through that? I assume just collaboratively, but.
Yeah, I mean, the same collaboration we've done with this first group of money. We don't know what the expenses are going to look like. That's why that money's there. And that's why it's so clearly laid out that it's for items that are not budgeted, right? Because we can't know, and it's supposed to be something that's supposed to help us with that. And so it's been a real collaboration so far. Right now we're ordering PPE, and the town's ordering the school side PPE so that we can get better prices on it, and so that we have a more of like a clearinghouse rather than us all doing it in a fragmented way. We're borrowing their sprayers to clean the buildings. It's a collaboration, and it will continue to be. And we recognize that we think the majority of the expenses in fiscal year 21 will be school expenses, right? And we'll have janitorial costs and PPE costs, et cetera, but we're not going to have the expenses like they're going to have. And so, we're here to support the schools as much as we can. They've been here to support us with the lunches and the food and letting us use the school nurses. And it's really been a really good collaboration, and I don't see any reason why that wouldn't continue.
Great, thank you. Right, any other questions regarding these items before we move on to the next agenda topic? Okay, So we will continue to discuss items with Town Manager Rodriguez and Finance Director Savage. So the next part of our agenda is really just a follow-up discussion regarding the proposed tax increment finance agreement with Amazon. So we had a conversation about that previously in a presentation from Town Manager Rodriguez and Director Shapiro. So just trying to follow up on that. I know more information has come to light, hoping you can share that. And then we as a committee may be taking a vote on that article this evening.
Okay. You mind if I screen share quickly, Sasha? Just because there's 3
No, that's great.
slides
Thank
that
you.
I'd love to share with you guys. So I don't know if any of you were able to watch the virtual town hall that we held today. Went really well. A lot of people watched. We had 4 people call in. And so we were really excited about that. And I was proud to be able to do that. But I want to share just some new information about the TIF. And okay, so one thing that we've learned since our last conversation with you is that the personal property valuation amounts. And so the Amazon has told us that in year 1, the personal property will be valued at $100 million. And as you know, personal property is charged at the commercial rate and it's excluded from the TIF, which means that Amazon will pay personal property taxes to the town. And so one thing that we have found out is that their personal property taxes in year 1 will be about $1.8 million. So that makes the total taxes, real estate and personal property, in year 1 of the TIF, $2.7 million. And so for those people that don't know, personal property, it generally includes tangible items that are not firmly attached to land or buildings. And a lot of the time, you'll hear people things that are not fixtures, right? So it's merchandise, furniture, machinery, tools, animals. I don't think we'll have animals in this one, but those are the things that will be included in that personal property bill. The interesting thing about personal property is it depreciates in value, right? So if you think about your car, right, when you buy it, it's worth a certain amount, and then every year it's worth a little bit less. And personal property is the same way, right? So one of the interesting things about the personal property depreciation rate is it will be depreciating as the real estate property bill increases. And so it really has the effect of evening out the taxes in many ways. Although Lynn has very astutely pointed out to me that the type of personal property they have may be depreciating kind of differently because they may be replacing it, which then again would bring it up to that high value amount. And so I think that's a really important new point. And I know we talked about the job. So the changes to this is that we know that the town will receive, and one thing I just want to say about these numbers is that we have to do these calculations in a vacuum, right? We can't account for changes in the tax rate or the value. So these could be the low end of these benefits, right? And we're talking about the property in a way that, the value, the tax rate's not changing. And so I just want to point that out, but there's no other way for me to do it, right? Because I can't figure out, what's the property going to be valued at in 3 years and what's our tax rate going to be. So I have to look at it using what I know today. So like we talked about last time, the town will receive a projected $18.2 million in net new real estate taxes over the 10-year term of the TIF, right? And we talked about how we'd be receiving $63.7 million in real estate taxes over that 20-year period that we know Amazon has the lease for. But now we also know that the personal property will be an additional $21.3 million with the depreciation schedule. So we're receiving $85 million over that 20-year period. And that doesn't include the base amount. The base amount's like another $500,000, right? So $85.5 million. But I want to compare that to something else, right? And this is a number that, I met with the assessor about today. If we don't move forward with the TIF, and Amazon said very clearly during our meeting today that the TIF is a material factor to this project going forward. And that if the TIF is not approved at town meeting, they would have to go back and reassess whether or not they would move forward with the project. And I think that's the first time that I've heard them say that publicly, but they did. They said it today. And so one thing I just want to compare is that if nothing happens on that site, and again, analyzing these numbers in a vacuum, but if nothing happens in that site and the building stays as it is today and we don't have Amazon, over the next 20 years, we will receive $12.3 million in real estate taxes and personal property taxes. So that's what we're comparing. We're comparing Amazon with the TIF at $85 million over 20 years to not giving the TIF and having the property bring in $12.3 million in the next 20 years. And that's what I have.
That's not including permit fees, right?
Right. The permit fees that we anticipate right now, they've already paid $500,000. we anticipate a $4.5 million permit fee, building permit.
Got it. I think that's what we had estimated as a FinCom last year too. Around there. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
About $400,000. But it's about $400 million in cost, construction costs, but you can only really value it based on the hard costs, right? And so if you go back to our TIF term chart and we talk about the building generally, we know that the estimated value construction will be the 247,128 number, and that's actually the number that they put on their building permit application. So.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing now so I can come back and.
Does any of the finance committee members have questions for the town manager regarding the TIF? I know we've all looked at it. We've asked some questions. Chris Allen?
I'm curious in a general sense of what's your view of whether the TIF will be, whether Amazon would ask for the TIF to be renegotiated. And the reason I say that is because I know lots of times you go to town meeting, you get all these numbers and everything sounds fantastic. And by the way, this does sound very desirable. But then in the next year or the next 2 years after that, we find out something's changed, something's different, or they're coming back saying, no, we don't want to do it this way. We want to renegotiate. Is there language in there concerning how permanent this is to be implemented? Is there any vagaries where there might be an ability to say to walk it back? What are our loopholes?
Yeah, there's no language that would allow them to come back and renegotiate the TIF. Remember, a TIF has to be attached to two things, right? It has to be attached to new construction and jobs. And if you don't have the new construction and the jobs, you're not eligible for a TIF. So unless Amazon was going to be doing additional construction on the site or bringing more jobs in that we didn't know about, there would be no reason for us to, or we wouldn't even be able to revisit this TIF.
Okay, illegally you would not be able to do
No.
it, you're saying?
No.
Okay, good, thank you.
Hi, Jen Love here. I have a question. When do you anticipate year one will be?
Fiscal year 22. So, they haven't closed yet. They're waiting on town meeting to find out what happens to close. And then they have to get their permits, the building permits. They have their site plan review done. They have their Concom stuff done. They have to get their building permits and then start their construction process, which would start with demolition because they're moving that from building. And so they've told me 2022.
Great, thank you.
So if year one starts in 2022, when approximately do you estimate we would get some of those other ancillary benefits, like a permit fee or, and you may not know the answer to that.
Yeah, the permit fee would be in 2021. I highly doubt they would apply for their permit before July 1st. They may apply for the demolition permit before July 1st, but I don't think they would apply for their final permit before July 1st, and they're certainly not going to apply for their final permit until they close. The rest of the benefits, which are the community benefits that are laid out, so the sewer contribution is within 15 days of closing. The post-project traffic calming study is 1 year after the issuance of the certificate of occupancy. The STEM funding is annual, $300,000 a year annually. The Veterans Workforce Event is an annual thing. The library and youth services technology money is upon a grant of certificate of occupancy. So that's basically when we say the building department goes in and says you can open. Not unusual. The tree contributions are annually for 4 years. The senior center funding for turn technology is again at a certificate of occupancy. The traffic mitigation is 90 days before full occupancy. And the fire fighting materials and equipment, half of that money is linked to the building permit for Lot B, and the rest of it, the $100,000 that's left, is the certificate of occupancy as well.
Thank you. So if this is approved at town meeting, there's possibilities that we'll see a first injection of additional revenue, and obviously we can't bank on that, but in FY21.
I think we could see the building permit fee in fiscal year 21.
And you said that was how much again?
$4.5 million estimated right now. $4.5 million estimated right now, based on the construction costs.
helpful. Thank you. Any other questions that you all as committee members would like answered?
I have one more question, Thomas Ringer. First of all, I think it's great. I think it's well negotiated. And I think it's very tough to negotiate against a multi-billion, the biggest company, stock market value right now. I think it's great. The one thing, I wasn't there in the last meeting. I don't know whether we discussed it. So there are, if I just take an average, like we're talking here $4 million a year in tax revenue. Did we estimate how much of direct expenses we will have because of Amazon being there? Are we saying that 4 million is a net 4 million profit, if you will, in the town, or is there? We estimate now there's a $500,000 ongoing expenses because we have this big a corporation doing business there. So I was just wondering, what's the net profit of that project?
Sure. So the project did undergo a financial review by the developer. Unfortunately, it was not peer reviewed by the town. It was before I got here, and I think that I would have had it peer reviewed. However, this type of development tends to be a much lesser burden than many other developments that we would see, right? So we won't see a negative impact on the schools or on the youth center or the library that we might see from some other types of development, right? And also, I think that the major burdens that we may see would be on police and fire, and we've done our best to try to mitigate those by other things that are in the development agreement. So, they're using a specialized fire prevention system that the fire department has really analyzed and peer reviewed to like the highest extent possible. And in addition, the traffic mitigation equipment, but also the fact that we're going to be able to approve both the trucking plan for construction as well as the trucking plan for the development prior to occupancy and prior to construction, which means that will really mitigate a lot of headaches for the police department because they'll be able to work with the town. And if you watch the thing earlier, we talked about doing a town meeting or a neighborhood meeting to talk about that traffic plan and get input on it from the town because we'll be able to kind of get ahead of some of those issues. And so I think that considering the type of development that it is, it's less burdensome than a lot of other things that we could have seen on that site.
I think it's great. Amazon in other towns, they get money to do business. We get money actually from Amazon, which is, I think, an amazing thing.
We're the first They did confirm today that we are the first development agreement, which I think is something to be really proud of for this community.
I think you can.
Awesome. Absolutely. Great. Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Okay, so you guys tell me, we can do this a couple different ways. So we may want to, we have one more thing I would love for the town manager and finance director to stay on the line for. But we could actually vote, if you would all like, today, just because then we will not have to do it next week before town meeting, on Article 31, the tax increment financing agreement article. We can do that here technically under old business. So yes, we can do that because we've already had this discussion previously. This is our second discussion. It is on page 48 of the town warrant. It is Article 31. Does anyone have any, discussion before we move forward, or does everyone feel confident in voting tonight? Everyone's shaking their head, just for the record. They're just all muted. All right. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion that we accept we make recommendation to do favorable action on Article 31, the tax increment financing agreement, as posted in the current year's town meeting warrants.
Chris Allen, second.
The motion was made by Tim Shearhart. Chris Allen seconded the motion. Any discussion?
great.
Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Sasha, I hate to do this to you, but you have to do a roll call because you're remote.
I was just
Sorry.
all right. So no, it's okay. I was just gonna say who said yes. So all right, we'll do it the other way. So Thomas,
Yes.
Jen,
Yes.
Ed.
Yes.
I also vote favorably. So the motion passes. Our Finance Committee recommendation on Article 31 is
You missed two of us.
favorable action. No, because you made the motion,
Oh, okay.
right? So you vote favorably, right, Tim?
Yep.
Chris, second in the motion. Chris, you
I
wanted
don't
to
know.
vote favorably?
Fine, Sasha. I don't know. No, I vote yes. I vote
Okay.
yes.
All right. So we had a unanimous vote for everyone in the meeting tonight to vote favorable action on Article 31 tax increment financing agreement.
And congratulations. That's an amazing piece of work that you did. I'm so pleased. It's very comprehensive and it must have taken a lot of time and effort, and kudos. Props
Thank
to
you. I have an amazing team, and I'm very proud of the work we did on it.
Melissa,
We're
That's
lucky.
excellent.
We're really lucky.
well
It's great.
done.
Well done.
Excellent. So we don't have to circle back on this, everyone. My thought, and I do have to touch base with the town moderator about this, is that we will prepare a statement regarding this article. So, I can work on that. And if anyone else also wants to work on that, I know some people have already done some due diligence on this. Typically what we have done is have some statement prepared if we want to present that, or if you feel like we don't. I know the town manager will be doing a presentation on this as well, but if there's something that you think we, really should express, and we can have some discussion about that.
So, Sasha, I do think that town meetings, the citizens there would expect the town finance committee to have some sort of comment on the TIF. So,
Great, me as well. Okay, so we can prepare that and touch base at our next meeting in order to make sure everyone is comfortable with that language, and I will have that prepared to be read before the vote on Article 31. Okay, let's move forward. We're officially in old business at this point. Part of old business is a discussion regarding the senior center. So I'm hoping that the town manager and the finance director can provide a little bit of information and clarification around the senior center and the sources of funding for the senior center, which directly relates to Article 12 in the warrant, the authorization for the Board of Selectmen to acquire the land 1 and 2 Surrey Drive. So I will turn this over to the town manager.
So Sasha, I have a full presentation that I had planned to give to town meeting. I'm happy to give that full presentation if you wish, or I can just kind of give a summary.
No, we've already had a presentation from the finance
Okay.
director.
Short and sweet. All right.
So you can just, if clear, that's fine.
Yep. So we have 2 articles that we're pending at town meeting that are related to the senior center, and they're Article 12 and Article 13. And Article 12 is first, and that is the purchase of 1 and 3 Surrey Drive for $550,000. And so if you've been following the project, you know that when we went through the design process, we determined that we really needed the adjacent lot at 1 and 3 Surrey Drive in order to do 2 things. One, have sufficient parking, dedicated parking for the senior center. And one thing that we heard from the seniors as we talked to them about the project was that they didn't think they could share parking with the housing development. And I agree with them, right? I see how quickly our parking lot fills up. And so they really needed the 80 dedicated spaces. And then additionally, one of the safety things that we heard was that the police department, the fire department didn't think it was a great idea for all cars to be entering and exiting through a common driveway. And so this additional lot gave us the capacity to have the exit through its own driveway and not having, seniors and residents kind of playing chicken a little bit, trying to get out of the building. And so what we did was we went ahead and we appraised the lot next to the site. It appraised at $550,000. We did a title search and an environmental review, and both of those came back as satisfactory. And so what Article 12 is trying to do is accept that land and pay for it. And so the funds that we are using is actually excess overlay. And so that excess overlay has been released by the assessors, and it has to be appropriated by town meeting to use. And in case you don't know, if you're watching at home, overlay is a single account that's used to fund abatements and exemptions of our committed real and personal property tax in a fiscal year. And so at times we will basically finish all of our cases or not have cases pending anymore because they've been settled or dropped off. And we may have a surplus of that overlay. And right now we do. And so what we're saying is that we would like to use that overlay to fund this. The overlay has been released at $550,000. And if it's not appropriated at town meeting by year end, it is released to the general fund and we can no longer use it. And so I'm going to kind of pivot into Article 13 a little bit here too, because it's hard to separate those two. We have gone out to bid for the project, and we have awarded a contract contingent on the town meeting vote. If we move forward, that construction will begin in July. We say June, but I think by the time we close on the property and move, it's going to be July. So there are some consequences of us not obtaining the second lot, and there's financial consequences, right? So we have spent $538,000 to design the project in its current form. If we do not move forward with the project in its current form, we have to revisit the programming and the size of the building. We have to go through the site plan design process again. We have to go through all of our planning approval processes again. We have to reconfigure the building. We're delayed until possible construction of April 1st, 2021, rather than July of 2020. And we would have to spend about $700,000 to redesign this project. So the only other thing I will say is that funding to date, and Lynn will correct me if I'm wrong because I keep messing it up, but in May 2017, we allocated $500,000 for architectural services. In May 2018, we allocated $5.5 million to fund the construction. And in May 2020, we're asking for $3 million additional for that construction. And why, right? Why are we asking for that? So the original project was originally conceived as part of the facilities master plan. That master plan was completed in 2012. As we talked about at our last meeting, we really did not account for any inflation. And additionally, we didn't account for any fixtures, furniture, IT, security, or anything like that. And when I do a project, I like to include everything because it's part of the cost of us doing the building. And if we're going to do it, we should do it right. And so one thing I will say is that the original project was supposed to be a renovation and addition of the current 7,000 square foot facility. So it makes sense that that budget wouldn't be correct. There was another version in Facilities Master Plan 1. There was actually new construction at the old police station at a cost of $6.9 million. So that's all. I tried to be as brief as possible.
Thank you. So I have questions from the committee.
Yeah, this is Chris Allen. So I'm going to play devil's advocate a bit here because, I've been to a lot of town meetings and this is going to come up. And the question will be, how can we spend this money on the senior center and this lot of land when we think we're going to be so short and the schools aren't going to have enough money? There you go. There's your first town meeting question. It'll come up.
That's okay. I mean, we have an ever-growing population of seniors in this community, right? And currently, our senior center site is undersized, and it's rather dramatically undersized. And so I think that while we have to make a commitment to the schools, we also have to make a commitment to our seniors, and we're trying to encourage seniors to age in place, right? Because we want to keep them as part of the fabric of our community. And I think that having a senior center, one, it increases property values. Two, it keeps seniors in their homes, which is one of our ultimate goals when we're doing budgeting and planning for the community. And I think pivoting back to our discussion on the budget, and unfortunately this article is going to be before that, but I think that we're not saying that we should stop with building. We're not saying we should stop with maintenance. We're continuing Facilities Master Plan 2, which is very school oriented. This is the last building in Facilities Master Plan 1. And I would urge town meeting and the finance committee to support this moving forward.
Just to be clear, I do support it, but thank you for your answer, because I think that's very important. And also, what's very important, as you say, is if we do not spend this money, what is the cost of not spending the money? I mean, you've outlined that in other projects and other reasons why now is the time to do that. Even with the schools, do the special ed because it's cost saving in the long run. And I think that's extremely important. We've already put a tremendous amount of funds into the project. Are those funds wasted? Does that just disappear? What happens with that? I mean, it's gone. So I fully support it. As a senior myself, rah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions regarding the senior center funding? So I just would like to point out as well, just for the Finance Committee, for Article 12 specifically, which would be the only article I recommend we vote on today or tonight, would be the authorization of the Board of Selectmen to acquire the land at 1 and 3 Surrey Drive. So that would be that $550,000 component that the town manager spoke about. The Board of Selectmen have voted favorable action on this article. The Planning Board voted unfavorable action. So I actually reached out to the chair of the Planning Board to ask for some clarification on that. And my understanding is, and Melissa, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the Planning Board actually has provided site plan approval. Is that correct? And a special permit?
Yes, they did set plan approval and a special permit on the site. They actually specifically did a special permit for the ancillary parking on the secondary site that we will be acquiring.
Okay, so just to my understanding, and I'm not a member of the Planning Board, is that the site itself is appropriate and is designed appropriately, in their opinion, for the current design and the current design with the extra parcel on Surrey Drive. So I just think that as a Finance Committee, although planning is not our purview, it's important to know that that we wouldn't be doing anything imprudent by spending those dollars as the site is currently planned. That's my understanding. So the way that I look at this is it's really, do we believe that this is an appropriate allocation of the funds from the overlay, and vote accordingly. So based on that, does anyone have any questions or need clarification? Okay, so I would consider this old business and us perfectly capable of voting on this tonight because we have had this presentation before. Does everyone feel comfortable moving forward with a vote, or does anyone want to make a motion to vote on Article 12 that is printed in the town warrant?
So I'll make a motion to have favorable action. This is Tim. On Article 12, to authorize the Board of Selectmen to acquire land, address 1 and 3 Surrey Drive, as printed in the town warrant.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that, Thomas Ringer.
Okay, so the motion was made by Tim Shearhart. The second was made by Thomas Ringler. Do I have any discussion? Okay, I will do a roll call vote. Again, Tim made the motion. Tim, I assume, and Thomas second. Chris Allen?
Yes.
Jen? Jennifer Lyle?
Yes.
Ed McMillan?
Yes.
And this is Sasha. I also vote favorably. So it was also a unanimous vote for the Finance Committee to provide favorable action on Article 12. Okay. Okay, moving forward, do I have anyone who wants to discuss anything additional for old business? Any old business? So we are, for the town manager and the finance director, we are just going to have a brief discussion about logistics, about meetings, and approving the minutes. So if you would like to jump off and enjoy the rest of your evening, please feel free.
I just, Sasha, if Chair, if you don't mind, I just want to say thank you. I know this has been a different and interesting budget season. It's certainly been in the 13 years I've been doing this, my most interesting. And I think you guys have done a great job with your due diligence in being very supportive to the town. And I appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you for all the
Liz.
work that you and Lynn have both done. It's much appreciated.
See you Tuesday.
Sentimentally. Yeah.
Good
night.
take care.
All right. Have a good night. Thank
too.
you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so as part of old business, I just want to circle back on meeting times. So we were going to have a meeting virtually during the day on Tuesday if possible, but I think perhaps now that we also have the ability to be on the Ed channel, we actually could do that Monday evening, right? And so if we have all of our pertinent information to vote on the operating budget, the capital budget, and the enterprise funds, we could actually just have a very quick meeting Monday evening virtually, take care of it, meet Tuesday, call it a half an hour before town meeting starts. So everyone arrives. We open up our meeting, which we can do socially. We don't actually have to talk, right? We can just open the meeting, which we need to have an open meeting for town meeting in case we need to take a vote. And then we will be sitting socially distant from each other at town meeting, and we can proceed that way. What do you guys think of that? I think that may be a cleaner way to approach this.
So since we have to be there a little bit early, I mean, like, I can't imagine like having a meeting at home and then going to the meeting. You know what I mean? Because we wouldn't be there on time. So we physically probably have to be there a half hour before the meeting, but we could still do it on our phones, right?
No. My point is we shouldn't have to do that. We don't need to have a virtual meeting on Tuesday. So my point is if we have our meeting on Monday night,
Oh,
I have to double check
okay.
with, I have to double check with Jillian on the calendar, but my
Gotcha.
thought process is let's get everything done Monday night.
Got it.
I know that's a challenge, but it will be a very short meeting if hopefully things proceed the way that, we think they may, or, we don't know. We will, let's just be clear, right? So if the school committee is voting on the MOU Thursday night, if the school committee votes favorably on the MOU, I believe that at this, from our discussions in our meeting, it may be a very quick discussion regarding the operating and capital budgets. Do you
Good.
feel comfortable with that comment, everyone? Everyone's
Yeah.
nodding.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So, and if they don't, then we will clearly need to have additional meetings. So what I can do is I can put a meeting on the calendar for Monday evening, virtually like this. That way we can have ample time. We're not rushing. It's not in the middle of the day when we have working kids, and we can address any issues we need to address, take care of them Monday night, close our meeting on Tuesday, town meeting. Town meeting starts at 5 o'clock. So I'll send out an email with what time we need to be there. I'll confer with the town moderator on that. It should be, in advance, but we will, again, all be socially distant from each other. So it's not an opportunity. It's not a great opportune time for us to just deliberate on things or discuss or vote. So we'll just do that to open the meeting, sit in our seats, find out where we need to be, sit down, and then we'll move forward. Does that sound?
It sounds good to me.
Sounds good.
Are we sitting
Okay.
on the field? On the is it outside on the stadium or is it inside?
Everything is outside on the stadium. It will be a little bit interesting in that, so for everyone listening at home as well, there'll be printed copies of much of the material, and they'll be printed in advance. But if you can, please bring your devices. So if everyone wants to bring either I don't know if you're going to have a table. I'm not sure yet about how that works, but at least your phone or a tablet or something where you can actually follow along on the presentations. There's not going to be a projector because it's daytime. So the projector, unless we had a very specific one, wouldn't work. So please bring a device in order to connect to Wi-Fi, which will be accessible, and you can follow along that way.
Thomas, from what I understand, the people who come to the town meetings will be sitting on the field, much like, and we will be in the stands, much like as if we were watching the band, so.
That's changed.
We are in the stands.
Oh.
Okay.
That is changed. So I think we were all going to initially be sitting in the stands. I don't know that that's the case anymore. So
Okay.
the moderator has not officially decided on the positioning of the entire committee. It may be
Okay.
that the chairs are just kind of on the stage area, those who have to present, or I'm not sure. So I may be separated from you guys. Mark did ask for input, and I hope it was okay to talk to a few of you, but essentially I said I don't think we have a lot of ego about this. We will be wherever is safe and best for the group.
No, no, no. Yeah, you get the hot seat. Yay.
Is that rain or shine? So
Yeah. Oh, no.
No. But I did hear that it's supposed to be a moderate, a temperate day with no rain so far. So keep your fingers crossed.
are we wearing face masks?
Yes.
Yes, masks are required for every person in attendance. Yep.
Yep.
Masks are required.
You could wear a hood.
That's a full body.
A full suit.
Scuba gear.
All right. So, any
Sitting
other
in a
old
bubble.
business?
Rolling.
I also want to say that I am preparing my presentation to speak regarding the budget. I think I'll be talking more from a higher level, like a macro view of how things progressed, what our process was given these uncertain times, and I will make sure to share that with everyone by the weekend, so that if there are any questions or anything like that, we can talk through those on Monday.
Awesome.
All right.
All right.
Okay. Let's move to approve the minutes for May 26th.
I move to approve the minutes of May 26th, 2020.
I'll second that.
Just double check.
You're frozen.
That's a great face, though, isn't it?
It is.
She froze earlier.
Who's behind that mask?
Uh, sometimes we pull a prank, like when we in video calls and you like just freeze and the other guy thinks nothing. And they keep talking and talking. You hear them, yeah.
I think her mic got out.
Oh, we lost
So,
our
Ed-
chair.
Hold on one second, everyone.
Here she comes.
Oh, she's still there.
I'm here. Hold on. Sorry.
All right. You don't need to be moving. You can turn off your camera.
Earlier, you were talking, but your lips weren't moving, which I thought was a pretty
Yeah.
good trick. But anyway,
Yeah.
Oh, body's not.
Really?
Yes.
Her whole body's not moving.
Yeah. You've got a deer in the headlights perplexed look on your face right now. It's pretty.
I'm reading.
You
I'm
got-
going to screen save it.
No. You got to give her a screenshot because it's just,
You-
no, you're frozen and it's.
you got absolutely a poster.
Oh,
There you go.
Oh, there you go.
He's back.
For
Okay.
everyone listening, apparently I was frozen with a very funny look on my face.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Smile.
Any comments? I know we just had a motion, but did anyone just rereading the minutes really quickly? Anyone have any comments or anything needs to be changed?
This is a great way to end the meeting, though.
Yeah.
Why don't we?
You got to end the meeting, Sasha. All we're going to do is laugh at you.
Can you guys just double? Are you guys reviewing the minutes, or I thought we were?
Do it-
looking
do
at-
it-
we're just watching.
I can't hear any of you.
We had a motion.
All right. I understand. I was just making sure everyone also reviewed the minutes. There's no changes before we voted on that motion.
See, that's a better picture right now. I know.
Oh, Tim was having fun here.
Okay.
I Ask for a vote, Sasha.
You guys are all good.
Yeah.
Who made the motion?
Tim.
No, I did.
Tim,
No? Oh,
you did, Chris. Let's
This is
start over.
Diane.
Chris, why don't you make a motion?
I make a motion to approve the minutes of, what did we say, May 26th?
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Jen. Second. All those in favor, Thomas.
I wasn't there, so I don't know if I can.
There you go. You cannot. You cannot.
do we
Tim,
have a quorum?
Yes.
Ed,
Yes.
I also approve. So there is the minutes are approved as of 8:28. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Chris Allen moves to adjourn the meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Tim Shearhart seconded the meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? Hearing none. The meeting is adjourned.
Yay. Good night, everyone.
Have a
Thank you for
great
the good laugh,
evening,
Sasha.
everyone.
Send her that
Good night,
screenshot, Tim. Send her the screenshot.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Right.